The Secret Code of the Freemasons of Sydney, Episode 3. The Freemasons' Egyptian Temple of Knowledge. This episode will reveal how the first key of the Freemasons was discovered. It will include where the key originated from and who brought it from its location and incorporated it within Freemasonry. With the pursuit of knowledge the Freemasons' main aim, the early Freemasons of New South Wales constructed a replica of an Egyptian temple and placed it alongside the College of Liberal Arts and Studies on College Street on the edge of Hyde Park. This Egyptian temple has since been moved to Petersham in Sydney, where it has been restored to its original glory. It is one of only 3 replica Egyptian temples outside of Egypt and is the finest example of Egyptian frieze in the Southern Hemisphere. This Egyptian temple is the headquarters of the Holy Royal Arch of Freemasonry and also the meeting place of the Masonic Lodge known as the Trinity Lodge, which has the number 666 attached to it. This is no coincidence. The Royal Arch Order of Freemasonry is the progressive steps the Freemason takes after he has taken his first 3 degrees. It is equivalent to learning the final chapters of any given book, whereas in the craft degrees, the initiate begins to understand the role of the sun and the moon, and that of the bright morning star known as Venus. The symbols that adorn the Royal Arch relate to the study of the star constellations and the whole of the cosmos. This will complete the Mason's journey. The Egyptian room is open to the public on the evening of the 2nd Friday in November every year. On this night, a full description of the meaning behind the hieroglyphs and the frieze is given by the Freemasons. The horns that are displayed upon the high priest are shown encompassing the sun on the hieroglyphs that adorn the walls of the Egyptian room. We recall that the horns around the sun were placed upon the Egyptian goddess Isis and her son Horus in the first episode. The symbol for Horus, the all-seeing eye, is now shown alongside the horns wrapped around the sun. Upon the walls is the word Isis repeated. The all-seeing eye wishes to show you something. It is the code. The horns are placed to represent the number 1, whilst the sun, being shown round, represents O. They appear to form the number 101. The 2 serpents are entwined around the sun on Thornton's obelisk in Hyde Park. They also form the number 101. This number 101 is shown upon the outside wall at the entrance to the Freemasons' Temple in Glen Innes in northern New South Wales. The number 101 is the first thing the Freemason sees when the blindfold is removed from his eyes in the lodge room. It is placed upon the altar. There is a reason the number 101 is placed so predominantly by the Masons. The number 101 is the binary code for the number 5. All computer and digital systems use binary code to communicate to each other. Nearly every modern appliance has a computer system embedded within its structure. The internet, although barely only 20 years old, works via the binary code. So is the code new? Did we only discover this code during the last century? I hope to show that the Freemasons have kept this binary code in front of the public's view for thousands of years, and that it is one of the two keys that can fulfill mankind's destiny. There has, however, been one small catch. This key, which is known as the binary code, can only be used in conjunction with the second key. Without the second key, it is powerless to work. But first we will discover how this first key, binary code, works. The computers of today recognise and communicate to each other via the binary code of noughts and dashes. This is how binary code works. Each dash is a multiple of twice the previous dash, starting with the number 1, and then doubling to 2, and then doubling to 4, and then doubling to 8, and then doubling to 16, and then doubling to 32, and then doubling to 64, and finally doubling to 128. These 8 digits are all known as bits, and all 8 digits combine to make up 1 byte. You will often hear the term 1 gigabyte. This means 1 trillion bytes of information is stored or moved. The noughts are placed either side of the dashes to indicate that there is no number between the dashes. An example is as follows. The number 101. The first dash indicates that there is a 1. The nought indicates there is no number 2. The second dash indicates that there is a 4. When we add 1 and 4 together, we arrive at the number 5. This is how all computers recognise each other. I have just returned from Toledo in Spain, where parts of the Inquisition were held. In its cathedral is an image of the 3 wise men who travelled from their respective countries to present to the mother of the chosen messenger precious gifts from their countries. Upon one of the wise kings is the symbol 101. This symbol was placed there hundreds of years ago by an organisation which wished to relay the importance of the symbol 101. This king, who is paying homage to the Christ. The word Christ quite literally means messenger. This king has travelled all the way from Babylon, the ancient equivalent of New York. Babylon was the centre for knowledge in ancient times. Babylon was where the Israelites were taken into captivity for disobeying their God. This was after the temple built by King Solomon was destroyed and razed to the ground. In Babylon, the remaining Israelites who were taken into captivity prospered and learnt the knowledge that was taught in their ancient schools. This story of the Israelites' term of captivity in Babylon is told in the degrees of the Royal Arch, and also refers to one of the Israelites leading them out of Babylon back to Jerusalem, with the specific task of rebuilding a new temple. The leader who was to guide the Israelites back to Jerusalem was called Zerubbabel, which quite literally means Zorro from Babylon. In Freemasonry, the highest position to be gained is to be placed in the chair of King Solomon as the master of the lodge. In the higher degrees of the Royal Arch, the highest position to be gained is to be placed in the chair of Zerubbabel. I have been fortunate enough to have been placed in both of these highly esteemed positions. So when I see an image of Zerubbabel, I become extremely inquisitive. I have found an image of Zerubbabel in St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. That church originally built by Lachlan Macquarie. Lachlan Macquarie was a Freemason and had obtained the higher degrees of the Royal Arch. The stories told in the Red Lodge of the Royal Arch all find themselves displayed in St. Mary's Cathedral. This Israelite, Zerubbabel, brought from Babylon to Jerusalem the first key to the Freemasons' code. To prove this, here is an image of Zerubbabel taken from a Masonic church, which shows the symbol 101 displayed all around the borders of his cloak. This symbol 101 has been placed upon Zerubbabel specifically by the builder of this church. This church is called St. Giles in Cheadle, Staffordshire in England. It was designed by Augustus Pugin. Augustus Pugin helped to design the House of Lords. He was one of the most famous architects of England. Some of his famous paintings of illustrated works included the architecture of St. Paul's and also Westminster Hall, the Temple Church in London. It also included the hall and staircase in the British Museum, an illustration which would be dear to every Freemason, and probably his most famous illustration, the Freemasons' Hall in Queen Street, London. Augustus Pugin was instrumental in placing this symbol 101 on the architect and builder of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, whose name was Zerubbabel. We may ask, why was the symbol 101 placed upon the cloak of the wise man who came from Babylon. What was at Babylon that was so important that it needed to be illustrated and linked to Zerubbabel? Babylon was where mankind first intended to build a tower that was to reach to heaven. It is mentioned in detail in the Bible. The Tower of Babylon was built for one purpose. That purpose was to reach to heaven. Without having the blindfold taken off of our eyes, many people believe that the builders of the tower quite literally stacked one brick upon the other in order to reach to heaven. The Freemasons of yesterday were taught something quite different. According to the original Masonic degrees that were taught to all guildsmen prior to the creation of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717, these guildsmen or craftsmen were taught that the builder of the Tower of Babylon, whose name was Nimrod, was to be their benefactor or guide. The guildsmen's degrees explained that Nimrod was the architect and builder of the Tower of Babylon, and that he treated the masons who built the tower with total respect for their work. Unfortunately, Nimrod was rebuked by a god in the Bible. This god was so incensed by the fact that mankind wished to build a tower that would take them to heaven, that he personally intervened to stop the tower from being completed. To render mankind incapable from ever building another tower that was to reach to heaven, he confounded their language, and in retaliation gave them 72 different dialogues. The number 72 can be represented by 6 plus 6 times 6, which equals 72. Here is a representation of the 72 different names given to God by each of the groups that were sent away in exile from the Tower of Babylon. However, there was one language that could not be changed. That was the language of symbols. Since the time of the destruction of the Tower of Babylon, the masons who built it have been the custodians of the secrets behind each symbol. The time has now come when the masons have become free to once again build the tower that is to reach to heaven. They call this new tower NASA. The masons have achieved the ability to once again leave the earth and explore space.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. The final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the space shuttle. America will continue the dream.
Program, Houston.
Roger, roll, Atlantis. Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the start of a sentimental journey into history. 24 seconds into the flight, roll program complete. Atlantis now heads down, wings level on the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Space Station. 40 seconds into the flight, the 3 liquid fuel main engines throttling back to 72% of rated performance in the bucket, reducing stress on the shuttle as it goes transonic for the final time.
They have done this by uniting behind the common aim of paying for the privilege by the means of money, and in particular by using the American $1 bill. The dollar bill has become the benchmark currency for trade and commerce. Countries would swap their own currency for this universally acclaimed marker for money. This currency, the American $1 bill, has paid for our return to the stars. Placed upon the American $1 bill is an unfinished pyramid. It signifies the unfinished Tower of Babylon. At its top is a smaller pyramid, which sits above an eye. This eye represents the all-seeing eye of the Egyptian god Horus, who has been instrumental in teaching Masons the lessons of how to tell the time. The all-seeing eye can be seen placed upon some of the Freemasons' aprons. Underneath the all-seeing eye, there is a larger pyramid. Inside this pyramid, there are 72 bricks. Each brick represents one of the dialogues given to the original Masons who built the Tower of Babylon. When all of these bricks finally come together in unity and harmony and can understand each other's dialogues, then the tower that reaches to heaven can finally be completed. With the aid of the Freemasons' binary code, this event has now happened. The wings attached to the now finished pyramid signal that we have the technical knowledge to leave the Earth's gravitational force and to once again set out to explore the vast universe. Part of this technical knowledge has come about by understanding the relevance of the number 72. Graham Hancock relates the importance of this number on his YouTube site, The Mysteries of the Ancient World.
Now, the precession of the equinox is a process that unfolds at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, and the number 72 is a key indicator of knowledge of precession, and that number may sometimes be divided by 2 to make 36. The 36 may be added to 72 to make 108. The 108 may be divided by 2 to make 54. You have multiples of these numbers. It doesn't matter how many zeros you add on to the end.
72 just happens to go into 432 6 times. This important number, 72, was first given to the woman Eve in the Garden of Eden, when the serpent tells Eve to take an apple from the tree of knowledge. What is omitted from this sentence is the next act that Eve must do. She was to cut the apple horizontally through its centre. So what secret does the apple hold? If we cut an apple horizontally through its centre, we find it has a perfect 5-pointed star inside. Just as I did a few years ago before I lost my arm. Inside the apple, at its centre, is a 5-pointed star. The angle between each of the 5 points is 360 divided by 5, which equates to 72 degrees. From that day, the 5-pointed star would be associated with Eve and the woman. By understanding how the symbol 101 represents the binary code for the number 5, we can start to understand how the code works. This symbol 101, which is placed upon the altar inside the Freemasons' temple, is shown to the public through one of the films which has come out of Hollywood. That film is The Matrix. In the film, Keanu Reeves opens the door to his secret apartment. Upon the door is the number 101. Can we interpret that the films that now come to light out of Hollywood wish us to be able to understand how the code works? In the first episode, I showed an Egyptian cartouche with the feathers and the eye of Horus. What is also in the scene is the number 101. The Egyptians were well aware of this code. Freemasons are taught on their very first night in the lodge that Freemasonry holds an ancient affinity to the Egyptians. The Egyptians placed this code upon the walls of their temples. Here on the wall of the temple at Luxor are 3 dashes. They are associated with the number for God, which is the number 7. We know these dashes as the Trinity or 3. On the tablets given to Moses are dashes and noughts. The nought is represented by the X, the Roman numeral for 10 or 10. The number 3, or the Trinity, is shown as 3 dashes. These dashes and X's are shown upon all clocks. The 3 dashes are the 3 pillars that are placed upon the first tracing board. These 3 dashes that are placed upon the temple at Luxor, next to the pharaoh, represent the number 7 in binary code. Now for the number that is associated with God, the number 7. 3 dashes 111 represents God's number 7. This is how we arrive at the number 7. The first dash is a 1, the second dash is 2, and the third dash is 4. By adding 1 plus 2 plus 4, we get the number 7. The 3 dashes are shown upon either side of the god of Nimrod, who wears his horns. The 3 dashes are placed upon Poseidon, the god of the underworld. 3 dashes are placed upon Custom's house. The 3 dashes can be seen placed upon the sign of St. James on Hyde Park, along with other Masonic symbols. As we start to understand how binary code works, we can look at other forms of religion, such as Buddhism, which also wants to teach us the code. In Buddhism, the serpent holds the pearl in its mouth. We can recall that the pearl can only be found inside the clamshell. It is not to be found in every clamshell. The secret is to find the clamshell that holds the pearl. In Buddhism, their sacred number is the number 9. It can be found upon the pagoda that is situated outside the Buddhist temple. This Buddhist temple is placed on the corner of Parramatta Road and Liverpool Street in Sydney. In Buddhism, there are 1001 ways to discover the secrets of the pearl. It just so happens that the Buddhist sacred number 9 is also the binary code for 1001. This is how it works. The first dash indicates that it is a 1. The first nought indicates there are no 2s. The second nought indicates there are no 4s. The second dash indicates there is a number 8. When we add 1 and 8 together, we get the number 9. Alongside this number 9 on the pagoda are the Chinese signs of the zodiac. On the outside of this temple, 2 serpents are shown upon the roof, converging upon the pearl that is placed in the centre. Directly underneath, upon the tiles, is the swastika. The swastika is also placed inside the circle, inside this temple. The swastika is a shape or symbol that has been adopted by nearly every religion, as this chart shows. I wonder if the swastika is the ancient symbol for naught or O, or even 10 or 10. The reason I say this is the swastika that is shown upon the Buddha has been manipulated by the Romans to form the number 10 or 10. They have done this by erasing the corner edges of the swastika to leave the symbol, the cross, which was their number for 10 or 10. If the swastika was an ancient symbol for 10 or 10, then the 18 swastikas that were placed upon the floor of Customs House would begin to show us how the distance around the Earth's equator was measured. This distance around the Earth's equator is represented by 60 seconds multiplied by 360 degrees. This gives us a distance of 21,600 nautical miles. This distance, 21,600 nautical miles, was used by ships' captains to determine their position at any one time. 360 degrees is basically 60 times 6. Multiply that by 60 seconds and we have 60 times 60 times 6, which is 21,600, the distance in nautical miles around the equator. This number, 60 times 60 times 6, which equals 21,600, is part of the secret mathematics that was taught in the ancient temples. This number is also associated with Stonehenge. It was only known by those people who had an understanding of mathematics, as can be learnt from that verse in the Bible which relates to the understanding of the number 666. The Freemasons of New South Wales, in numbering their Trinity Lodge 666, had this understanding. Bruce Cathy explains how he came to understand how the world's energy grid was located. He did this by changing his measurements into grid geodetic measurements and altering the daily clock to 27 hours. He then found that the pyramids and Stonehenge were perfectly positioned on these energy grid lines. Here is Bruce Cathy explaining his methods.
I found I wasn't getting perfect answers, and I wondered if there was any time difference. And I finally found that if I used a time base of 27 segments in one revolution of the Earth instead of 24, everything was perfect, and I was getting perfect answers all the time. So I then had all my work in grid geodetic measure and grid time. And from there on, my work progressed fairly quickly. I checked ancient places around the world like the pyramids and Stonehenge, and I found that they were sitting on these geometric points, and I could analyse these ancient places in these values and get answers from them. In other words, when those things were built thousands and thousands of years ago, those people knew this secret mathematics, harmonic mathematics.
After creating episode 1 and episode 2, and nearly finishing this episode 3, a Masonic friend suggested I take a look at a website that Carl Monk had created entitled The Code. In the very first episode, Carl explains that Stonehenge originally had 60 large stones within its outer perimeter. Carl then states that Stonehenge is positioned 51 degrees and 10 minutes and 42.352 seconds from the equator. All this can be recorded on the longitude and latitude sites. Carl then states that the ancient mathematicians multiplied the numbers 51 by 10 by 42.352 and came up with the number 21,600, which is 60 times 60 times 6. He places these numbers into pictures on his website. These numbers are truly the secret to mathematics. Carl knew that these ancient people from a civilization that built the pyramids were using astronomy and science far beyond where we are today. I believe that the best way that they could relay their message to us was through the visualization of symbols such as the swastika. Would the original guildsman who placed the swastika upon the whole wall of Christchurch Cathedral have really been placing the symbol 10 or the number 10? The Freemasons have placed the number 101 alongside the two patron saints of the order. These two saints are John the Evangelist, whose symbol is the Holy Grail with the serpent inside, and John the Baptist, whose symbol is the clamshell. Each of these saints, placed either side of 101, are associated with the longest or shortest days of the year. But this symbol 101 is not unique to any one culture. It can be seen in the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico. It is placed upon nearly all ancient calendars. This stone calendar is saturated with symbols, most of which relate to a portion of time. The symbol that shows 101 also has 4 smaller dots in its corners. On other Mayan calendars, it is shown as follows, where between each dash there are 5 dots. Were the ancient Mayans able to use this code as their number 5? The calendars were enormous and extremely heavy. They were built to stand the test of time. The Mayans placed dashes and noughts upon most of their artifacts. The Mayans called this magnificent calendar the Stone of the Sun. It was their most prized possession. The 5 dots between the dashes were highlighted all over the calendar. The 5 dots are shown on the playing cards in the same position, on all 4 sets of cards. But there is an artifact which is placed in Sydney that also shows the code. It is situated in Rawson Park in Mosman. It is a cairn. The cairn consists of 1,750 stones that come from every parish in Scotland. The stones were gathered by Sunday school children and ministers. The stones were brought from Scotland to commemorate the bicentenary of the landing of Captain Arthur Phillips in Sydney Cove. The stones were erected and placed into the shape of the cairn by the craftsman Duncan Matheson. They stand in the highest point in Rawson Park, overlooking the harbour of Sydney. From this vantage point, the harbour and all the ships that pass through it can be seen. The park is now home to a famous cricket pitch. It is also now called the Alan Balder Oval, being named after the Australian Test captain. I was first told about the cairn by the Alderman Peter Clive, whose commemorative plaque still stands in the park. Councillor Peter Clive was one of the members of Mosman Council who helped consolidate the cairn at Rawson Park. Peter was an active member of Port Jackson and Lewis Lodge that met at the Mosman Masonic Centre. I would spend many nights in lodge with Peter learning about his trips to Scotland and the cairn. After visiting the cairn many times, it dawned upon me that at the top of the cairn was a stone. It was brought from the hillside in Ulva, which was the birthplace of the 5th Governor of Australia, Lachlan Macquarie. On one side of the stone was the inscription Arn Tarn Briach Diarge, which translates to the Red Tartaned Army. On the other side of the stone there are 5 dots and 2 dashes. when these symbols were carved into the stone that came from Ulva is hard to tell. What can be sure is that this stone cairn, the way it has been designed and built, it will be there for many hundreds of years. The builder of this cairn wished us to know that the knowledge associated with the serpent is incorporated into this structure. He did this by placing a stone engraved with the inscription that it was brought from the Black Adder Isle from Glasgow Cathedral. Underneath the cairn, a time capsule was placed in 1989. This time capsule contains memorabilia that showed events and images that were relevant in 1988 in Scotland and Australia. This time capsule is not unique to this cairn in Mossman. A time capsule was also buried underneath St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. This image displayed in a mosaic window shows the two workmen burying the time capsule. Lachlan Macquarie, the builder of this cathedral, and whose image is shown in this window, would have been well pleased to see the serpent that is positioned above his head, to go on over 100 years later and find a place underneath the marker brought from his own village, with the code upon it. The trowel placed in Lachlan Macquarie's hand as he lays the foundation stone in St Mary's Cathedral can also be seen in the hands of George Washington as he lays the foundation stone for the Capitol building in Washington. The trowel is an important symbol and tool of the trade for every Freemason. Here is George Washington's trowel. It has been preserved as a memorial to him. George Washington was also a Freemason. The Freemasons of America constructed a Masonic building in Washington and named it after George Washington. The building stands 101 metres in height. The Masons incorporated the code into this building. On Bruce Cathy's website, entitled The Harmonic Code, Rod Morpin, who helped design the website, shows that the Washington Memorial is clearly placed upon two intersecting grid lines upon the world's harmonic energy grid. This is no coincidence. Outside the Masonic Memorial, in front of its entrance, stands the square and compasses. These are two of the main symbols of the Freemasons. The compasses are usually set at 33.3 degrees, the number of degrees in Freemasonry. The building itself incorporates this number. It is 333 feet in height, as if to help to put all of the pieces of this Masonic jigsaw together. The Tower of Babylon in Iraq also happens to be 33.3 degrees from the equator, and according to Bruce Cathy's website, Saddam Hussein placed his summer palace at Babylon on the world's energy grid. I think we can safely conclude that the original Tower of Babylon may also have been placed upon this energy grid line, and that its positioning, its dimensions, and all other characteristics have been kept for the Freemasons for our posterity, until a time when we have the ability to understand what to do with the knowledge. Can the number of degrees 33 play a part in the placing of the Fountain of Life in Sydney? Let's find out. Captain Cook, whose journey of discovery aboard the ship the Endeavour led him to Botany Bay in Sydney. Captain Cook was given a secret letter by the Royal Society in England. This letter is now in the National Library of Australia. Captain Cook was not to open this letter until after he had assessed the scientific observation of following the transient of Venus to Tahiti. On his arrival in Tahiti, Captain Cook, upon opening the letter, learnt he was to search for a new land in the great southern continent. He was to make contact with any of the natives of this land and try to establish trading posts. If the natives were willing, and upon negotiations, he was to claim any lands for the King of Great Britain. The new lands he claimed were to be called New South Wales. He arrived in Botany Bay in April 1770. It's interesting that Botany Bay is 33 degrees south of the equator. Did Captain Cook specifically land at this inland harbour because it was located at 33 degrees? Or did someone in the British Admiralty preset the location with prior knowledge of this great continent? The majority of land around Sydney lies within the 33-degree latitude band, one of the most striking of which is a small island situated at the end of Pittwater in Broken Bay. Here is an aerial shot of the Pittwater and its bays, with the island being totally surrounded by the sea. The island was originally called, by Governor Arthur Phillips, Mount Elliot Island, in honour of a wartime colleague. However, approximately 1 century ago, the island's name was changed by everyone who came into contact with it to Lion Island. Every day I have the good fortune to look out over this island. The island received its name because it resembles the Great Sphinx in Egypt. What's really intriguing is that the island is positioned 33 degrees and 33 minutes in latitude from the equator. What's even more fascinating is that a friend and Masonic colleague has taken a photo shot of Lion Island using Google Earth. It seems to resemble the face of a human being, with all of its features clearly visible. My Masonic colleague has added this image to a Facebook website he has created, which is entitled Ancient Landmarks in Australia. Using Google Earth, he has been able to locate many more of Australia's landmarks. Could the image of the Sphinx Being shaped as closely as possible by Mother Nature on this island, and being positioned at exactly 33 degrees and 33 minutes from the equator line, have been the site chosen to be a marker where the image of a man would be carved out of the natural rock. There is only one small hiccup. This image of the face can only be seen from the air. This band that stretches around the globe at 33 degrees, either south or north of the equator, must be very important for the Catholic Church to move its astronomy centre from the Vatican in Rome to a new venue that is located in Phoenix, Arizona. The newly located Catholic Astronomy Centre is positioned within the latitude band of 33 degrees, and just for good measure, also within the longitude band of 33 degrees. The phoenix is a symbol that came out of Egypt. The words Ra and Zion are also related to the stories that come out of Egypt, with the Freemasons veiling their words in allegory. The words Ra and Zion have been transformed to spell the word Arizona. In this episode, we have learnt that the binary code number 101 is associated with the number 5. We have discovered that this number 5 and the binary code are important symbols in a Freemasons lodge. We have seen that the representative of the highest position in the Royal Arch Freemasonry, whose name is Zerubbabel, wears the code upon his cloak. We can see that Hollywood wishes to share this knowledge with us in the film The Matrix. We know Zerubbabel came from Babylon, and that Babylon was the original site for the first tower that was to reach to heaven. We have seen that the location of Babylon, being positioned at 33.3 degrees, was on the world's harmonic energy grid, and was why Saddam Hussein built his summer palace on this energy grid line. Bruce Cathy has informed us that free energy exists in the atmosphere, and that by using mathematics we can locate many of these ancient sites. The next and final episode will reveal the second key of the Freemasons, and will also show what lies behind the door that this key unlocks.